time I turn this corner, I just think of so many memories. This is Fremont Street and Fremont and Gifford. And this is the street that I was born, raised, grew up on, and this became the heart of Elgin's black community. Fremont and Hickory were the only integrated streets in Elgin at the time I was growing up. This is a house where Don Ehlers and his family lived. Don was one of the few white guys in the neighborhood, and across the street was a German family. But Don was an interesting guy because he is a very handsome white guy, and all the black girls used to love Don Ehlers. Curly hair, great smile. He was a wonderful guy. This is a vacant lot here now, but there used to be a house here that my aunt owned, and it was called Ada's Eat Shop. That was the first black restaurant in Elgin. And she had a couple of picnic tables out here for the summertime. But it was a house, and she sold barbecue and hamburgers and ribs and chitterlings and cornbread and those kind of things. My Aunt Ada, who had the Eat Shop here, she rented a couple of rooms out. But she rented one of the rooms out to a young man, and his name was Hans Massaquoi. Some of you may have heard his name before. He ended up being the manager of Jet magazine. He was assistant manager with Ebony magazine. Well, Hans grew up as a black boy in Nazi Germany during Hitler's reign. And he wrote a fascinating book, a fascinating story, growing up black in Nazi Germany. There's a picture in his book with a Nazi swastika on his shirt, and he's waiting, and with a group of people, he's waiting for Hitler to come by in a parade after the war. Hans went into the military so that he could get United States citizenship. And then he came here after the military, and he lived here, and then he went to ECC. And then he went on to University of Illinois, got his degrees, and ended up working with Ebony and Jet magazines. This house here was my Uncle Dan Harding's house. Like many black people that were in business, they had rubbish hauling businesses. They were here long before waste management came along. And my Uncle Dan was also a barber. Elgin was so segregated, we could not go to white barber shops, and the same with beauty shops. So beauty shops and barber shops became a necessary thing. This is the home of George Clark. He was about 6'11" when he was in high school, almost one of the first 7-foot basketball players in the state. George went to Sheridan School. George went to Elgin High. George and Flynn Robinson were on the same ball team, and both of them came from the settlement area. George from right here at Fremont, and Flynn from right up on Hickory. George is in the Hall of Fame, the Elgin Sports Hall of Fame. George ended up touring the world for 3 years with the Harlem Globetrotters basketball team. And Flynn, he ended up playing with the Chicago Bulls, the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Lakers, Jerry West and them. They ended up getting a ring. He got an NBA championship ring out there. I'm at the house of Mozella Joy. This house, this monstrous house, if you would believe it, was moved here. It was one of 2 houses that were moved to Fremont Street. The Joy's house was ravaged by fire, so Mozella Joy and her family did not have a place to live. There was a doctor in Elgin that told the Joys they could have this house if they moved it. It was moved up here on a major operation from Channing Street. Tree limbs had to be cut, phone wires had to be let down. They had this house on a flatbed, a big flatbed, and this flatbed trailer had 747 airplane wheels on it because of the weight of this house. Regular convention and tires never would have worked. Now, This is where I was born and raised and grew up here, 475 Fremont Street. I had 13 brothers and sisters. My dad had a shoe shop. It was located at 415 Dundee Avenue down in the basement. He raised 14 of us with the shoe shop. I did have brothers in the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and 3 of us in the Marines. So this is another family that had multiple people serving in the armed services while I was growing up. And if you remember, when you had somebody in service, your window, a star hung in your window. And there was many stars and many windows up and down Fremont, Hickory, and Gifford Street from the 28 young men and women that served in the armed services. This is the house where O.C. Nixon lived with her sister, Mrs. Singleton. And this is the home where Bobby Gilliam grew up in. Bobby Gilliam became the longest-serving city councilman in the city of Elgin's history and was the first African-American politician in our city's history.
I was born and raised on Fremont Street. Lived there most of my life. I was a very, very poor student, not highly motivated. No one really pushed me. My mother supported me, but there was no push to go to college or to get good grades, just pass. And that's what I did. I just passed along. I wanted to be an athlete, playing basketball. When I was in high school, I thought I'd get a scholarship. I thought I was good enough. Well, the problem was my grades weren't good enough. My grades were very poor, so I didn't get any offers. So that summer, I went to work at a place called Flexonics in Bartlett. And I was working during midsummer, and I realized I can't do this for the next 40 years. I can't do a punch press. So I thought, what am I going to do? Then I got a call one evening from a guy by the name of Dick Durant, who was a coach at ECC. And he asked me, what are you doing? I said, nothing. He said, are you going to school? I said, no. He said, do you want to come to ECC? I said, yeah, but I don't have any money. He said, well, I'll get you a grant and get you a part-time job. And from there, everything took off. I got a basketball scholarship to the University of Nevada, Reno. I was starting point guard, started all 4 years. I wanted to be a coach, so I majored in physical education. After I graduated, I never looked at U46 for a job because I thought they wouldn't hire me because I was black. I was going to look somewhere else. And then I got a call from my former principal and said, what are you doing? I said, looking for a job. He said, well, I'll hire you. So I taught physical education, and all my experience was at Elgin High School. Back in the 60s, a lot of blacks were complaining about not being involved in the political process, and I was one of them. I was kind of whining. And I had an uncle that was kind of a precinct committeeman. And he said, instead of complaining, do something about it. Run for council. And that started my career. I made my mind up when I first started. I was going to do what's best for the community of Elgin, treat everybody fairly, make it a level playing field, and that's what it's going to be. I wasn't going to be anti-white or pro-black. I was going to be what's best for Elgin. And that was always been my motto. The pressure came from the black community. That's where the pressure came from, because they thought I became the spokesperson. And if you didn't raise hell like a Jesse Jackson or yell or scream, then you weren't doing your job. Then you're kind of selling out. You're kind of becoming Uncle Tom. So I had to fight that. And I still fought that even to this day, that they want you to yell and scream and throw the gavel down, attack your fellow council members. And that's not the way to get things done. So that's something that I've had to carry with me for 40 years.
Right next to the home that Bob Gilliam grew up in is the home of Elgin's first black TV repairman. His name was Munson Anderson. This house was the home of the Carver Leach family. Carver Leach started the first maintenance business owned by African Americans. It was a family business. All the Leaches from the time they were little kids worked in that business. They went and they cleaned toilets, they learned to wash windows, they mopped floors, they emptied garbage cans. They did the whole thing. The whole family, including Mrs. Leach. The whole family worked. It got so big, the business grew so fast, that he ended up with the keys to most of downtown Elgin. He had the keys to jewelry stores and restaurants where we couldn't eat. And he would do the windows early in the morning, and he'd do the maintenance work. That's floors, garbage cans, everything.
My dad, when he was young, he wanted to make his own money. So he started shining shoes in a barber shop downtown Elgin on the corner. It was on the corner of Douglas and Chicago Street. And that grew into cleaning the barber shop. And from that, other people said, well, Carver, why don't you come over and help us? Now, he was doing this in high school, after school. His business just grew and grew and grew to one of the biggest maintenance services in Elgin. And I think it's because he was such a sportsman in high school. A lot of the people knew who he was, and so they trusted him.
Now, Mr. Leach was a great athlete at Elgin High, one of the first early black athletes at Elgin High when they had lightweights and heavyweight teams. They didn't have freshmen and varsity and junior varsity and all that. So he was a little guy, and he played with the lightweights, but he was fast. His sons followed in his footsteps at Elgin High over the years. Buster Leach, he played baseball and football. And Hank Leach, he played football and he played basketball. Yvonne Leach became Elgin High's first black cheerleader. Gigi Leach became Elgin High's second black cheerleader. Gigi Leach also had Elgin's first African-American newspaper. It was called The Vital Force. Gigi produced it, she did the typing, she did everything for that newspaper, including delivering it. And she'd be up and down Fremont, Hickory, and there's some other places that wanted it. She delivered that wherever people called that wanted to read her newspaper. This house here is the home of Art Smith, Bob Smith, and Don Smith. Mr. Bob Smith was in the Navy. His son, Bob Smith Jr., was in the Coast Guard. He was the first black commander of Navy Pier. It was the last 2 years of military service, so he caught some good duty. And another son, Art, was in the Army, and another son, Don, was in the Army. Don became the first director of the Hemmons Auditorium in Elgin. He has written a wonderful book, and you can get it at the library and other places.
I saw an application in Elgin for a assistant engineer at the City Hall. And that was pretty new. It was on Dexter Court. And I went there, worked under Larry Krampko was my boss, and worked in the engineering department and learned more about boilers and chillers and stuff like that. There was a lady named Hattie Pease Hemmons left this money for a performing arts building to be built in Elgin on the mall, because City Hall was in a mall. Right next to them was the appellate court of Illinois, the library, and the post office. So they started the construction for Hemmons building. Larry Krampka, my boss, said, Don, I want you to go over there and oversee the construction until the building's complete, and then we'll bring you back. I said, okay, Larry. I went over there, and in 1969, I think, the building opened. It was ready for action. And so they said, okay, you can come back. But nobody knew how to run the sound, the lights, the cameras, nothing but me, because I was there with the contractors, all of them, light people, sound people. And they said, Don, can you go back over there for a while till we get somebody professional? I said, yeah, whatever. Well, the years rolled by, and I guess they checked and found out what it would cost to get a full-time auditorium manager, so they decided they let this black boy, since he was doing so good, stay on.
Where this house now sits used to be the Fremont Recreation Center, the house that was the Fremont Recreation Center. The house and property was donated by Louis Andrews. Louis Andrews was Elgin's first black postman, and he was Elgin's first black philanthropist. The Fremont Recreation Center was the hub of not just Fremont Street, but the hub of the black community for many, many, many years. There were Bible study classes, there were sewing classes, there were cooking classes, there were woodshop classes, tutoring going on, there were scouts. The Fremont Recreation Center was a former community chest and United Way agency. That's where they got their budget. When I became the director for 3 years, they were getting $9,000 a year to provide programming for the whole black community in Elgin. This is an interesting house. This is where the Hunters lived. Gloria and her sister, Charlene. Their dad built this house. Their dad was a Buffalo soldier. They were called the Buffalo Soldiers because of their coarse hair.
Our father was from Mississippi, from Canton, Mississippi. So
well, it was Gluckstack back then.
Oh, okay.
It's been incorporated into Canton. It was a whistle stop. The train used to stop there and get the water, you know, and so they called it Gluckstack. I guess because the water went gluck, gluck, gluck into the smokestack.
I didn't know that story.
I don't know. I'm just saying that, you know.
Yeah. But he actually got up here. There's an interesting story because he hopped a train. The idea was that the North was quote unquote better. And
the
so,
promised land.
Yeah, so they moved, he wanted to come north, and then he hopped a train, and that's how he got up here. So my dad said when he first came up here, they were literally still lynching people in the South. They were lynching African Americans. So it was that kind of climate when he came here, and that was in 1937. So he was able to overcome, I think, a lot of those kinds of prejudices and get along in the community and be respected and get recognition, which is, a major accomplishment considering the time and where he came from.
We've just rounded the corner of Fremont Street, and we're heading south on Hill Avenue. We're heading to Hickory Place. But before we go past this house, we're stopping for a minute. This is the house of a guy around Elgin that was very, very famous up and down the valley, and his name was Maynard Zombie Lucas. He was one great dancer. He did the jitterbug dance, and he used to team up with Carver Leach, and they were one of the greatest teams up and down the valley. This is where Oliver Wheeler Jr. lived with his wife for a number of years. The Wheeler family and the Newsom family were two key families as it relates to the growth and development of the Elgin black community. Miss Viola Wheeler had one of the first trucking businesses, hauling rubbish and stuff in the city. Oliver Jr. was one of her sons. Eugene, he had Barbara Jean trucking business. Trucking business and rubbish removal were two employment opportunities for a lot of new blacks that came to Elgin. There were also the opportunities for blacks to have a business of their own. I'm in front of the home of Helen Ballou. Her ancestry goes back to the first 110 to arrive in Elgin as contrabands and ex-slaves. Over my shoulder is the home of my grandmother, Susan Harding and Blaine Harding. The Harding family is a legacy family in Elgin. They were among the first blacks to come to Elgin in the railroad boxcar in 1862. The connection was Bosley, Harding, Broadnax. So this was the home of my grandmother. This home behind me is an extremely important home to the city of Elgin and the Elgin black community. This was the home of the Hall family. John Hall Sr. Was one of the first blacks to be invited for jury duty in Kane County. He was also a leader in Elgin in terms of fighting way back then at that time for civil rights for people in the black community. John Hall had two sons. Those two sons became very famous. One of them was Pete Hall. He was a football player at Elgin High. He was the first black captain of an Elgin High football team. And Pete Hall was actually the first black male to graduate from Elgin High. And the other son, Dr. Lloyd Hall, attended Wing School in Elgin, Illinois. He then left there and went to Aurora. He finished in a school at Aurora High School, and he had scholarships. He went from there to Northwestern University. He was a tremendous student there. He finished Northwestern University with a degree in industrial engineering. He could not find a job because of his skin color. So, Griffin Laboratory in Ohio hired him, and Dr. Lloyd Hall became a renowned chemist and he is listed in the Who's Who of the United States. You can also read more about him in E.C. Elf's book on the black community. Whenever I come past Mrs. Green's house, I smell fried chicken. As old as I am and as many years as have gone by, I go by this house, I smell fried chicken. I'm at the corner of Dundee Avenue and Hickory Place, about a block from Mrs. Green's home. This spot that I'm standing on used to be the home of the famous Green's Fried Chicken. This block would have cars lined up all the way up to Gifford Street on both sides of the street. And people from out of town, people from all over, up and down the Boxcars Valley, they would come here for that chicken on Sunday afternoon after church. And as you well know, on Sunday afternoon after church, maybe 8 out of 10 homes might be having chicken for Sunday dinner.
In 1898, my father is about 20 years old, and he got a job working for the railroad as a Pullman porter and ran from Chicago to New York on a train called Broadway Limited, and he did that for 40 years. My father retired in 1947, and he decided he wanted to do something else after 40 years working on the railroad. So he opened a Green's Fried Chicken stand, and him and my mother ran that stand for 10 years. Very popular, very popular. At first, people didn't want to have us there because the neighborhood took out a petition to keep us out of there. There was white people that had an issue with it because they didn't know what it was going to be like. They thought it was going to be rowdy, a lot of drinking, a lot of fighting, but it was just the opposite. I never got to work on any of the floats. Dad always had somebody build them. That's when Elgin used to have Labor Day parades. And the first one we had in 1949 was just a Jeep covered with flowers and everything, and nice, decorated nice. And Tommy Blue, one of our neighbors, he drove. And my sister, Alberta, and I rode on that. And we didn't win anything, but people liked it. And next year, Dad said he was going to build a bigger one, have a bigger one built. And he did. And then he invited all the girls in the neighborhood to ride on the float with him. And my mother, and he named her the Queen of the Chicken, Fried Chicken. That was before KFC, Brown's Chicken. I mean, they might have been existing, but they weren't in Elgin. And so we kind of had the monopoly on that stuff.
Mrs. Green had a carnival right here where we're standing, in her front yard, in her backyard, on the side of her yard, and in the street. In that carnival, she had a real merry-go-round. She had real ponies here on Hickory Street for pony rides for the kids. She used that carnival to raise funds for the Fremont Recreation Center. Jim Stoll used to live in the house behind me. He was one of the few white guys that grew up with all us black guys in the settlement area. And this house is the home of the Jake Downs Sr. family. And the Jake Downs family was quite an interesting family. Now, the first Downs to come to Elgin was Benjamin Downs. He arrived here in 1881. Benjamin Downs was a slave on the Churchill and Downs plantation near Baltimore. And at age 13, he ran away and through the Underground Railroad made it to Canada. And then he arrived here in Elgin in 1881.
Benjamin Downs, he was my grandfather. He was my dad's father, yeah. The same one that you see at the museum in that picture of the baptism. That's him in the bowler hat. My dad was an upholsterer and an appraiser of antiques, and he was also a taxidermist of the first order. There were not any black taxidermists in the state of Illinois that I have ever heard from or heard of at that time. And the furniture business and the taxidermy business paid big money.
Behind me is the home of Elsie and Mary Wheeler West. Mary West is a part of the legacy family of Elgin. She was a descendant from the first 110 that arrived here. So she has a rich, long history here. Mary was president of the Professional Businesswomen's Association. She served on the Fremont Recreation Board. She served on the Elgin Human Relations Board. And she also began a church at 401 Hill Street in Elgin, and that became New Hope Baptist Church of Elgin, which is now located on the west side of Elgin. She took over from her mother the American War Mothers Club. That was a group of black women here in Elgin that had been in service of the armed services. And they used to sell poppies and at the stores once a year. And when they sold those poppies, they used that money, and they did things like send us a subscription to the Elgin Courier. So no matter where you were in the world, you could keep up with the sports in Elgin, you could keep up with the news in Elgin. I'm at the corner of Gifford and Hickory Place. This is the location where the Johnson family used to live. The Johnson family, they had a son named Preston, 16 years old. He was taken out to what is now Wink Park. It was the woods then, and he was tarred and feathered by the Ku Klux Klan. They took him out there and they staked him out and they tarred and feathered him. He survived that because the Klan had used coal tar. Preston had not fathered a child with a white girl, and that's what it was all about.